Remember when the Bengals weren't a horribly run organization that wasted the prime of one of the best quarterbacks on planet Earth? Yeah, me neither. Welcome in, everybody, to the reveal of the number 15 team in my power rankings heading into the 2025 NFL season, as today we take a deep dive into the Cincinnati Bengals. Who dey, baby? And ranking 15th here, I obviously don't think this team just stinks. Hell, they even open up a brand new tier with this series and my power rankings of teams that I think should legitimately expect to at least win one playoff game. But if they are going to accomplish that, there are a lot of aspects of this team that they need to sort out that we need to talk about here today. So let's not waste any more time and get started with today's deep dive. And as we dive in, if you could take just a second to hit that like button down below, it is a free and easy little thing that really supports my channel. It tells YouTube you enjoy the video and it pushes it out to other Bengals fans and NFL sickos just like you. Also, make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss any of our remaining deep dives coming at you basically every other day now. We are in the sprint, not a marathon portion of getting these videos done and this series done. So it's going to be a crazy but fun month here. So let's go ahead and get started talking about the Bengals coaching staff first and looking at their offseason changes with the coaching staff. So they did make a change at defensive coordinator. They say goodbye to Lou Anarumo, who had kind of run his course here in Cincinnati. We talked about him in the Colts deep dive. He goes and gets hired immediately. I'm looking forward to see if he can have a bounce back year in a different organization. So I did say it's a moderate loss for the Bengals, even if this defense fell apart last season. But they go with Al Golden, a very experienced defensive coordinator from Notre Dame and someone with a lot of head coaching experience as well. Ultimately, as we are asking if these teams got better, worse, or stayed the same with each of these individual categories, I said to be determined with the coaching staff here, as Al Golden is getting his first bid as a defensive coordinator in the NFL. We're going to have to find out how good he is at this. But with that, let's start this coach and scheme breakdown at the top of things with Zac Taylor, who now heads into his 6th season as the head coach here. And I think Zac Taylor is fine as a head coach. I think he is an NFL caliber head coach. Not all that exciting though. For example, I have him as the 25th overall head coach in the league. As you look at him being an offensive-minded head coach, the pass game coach rankings for the Bengals are pretty solid, as high as 14th with a B- grade, and the run game coaching gets a C+ grade, which ranks 19th to 27th in the league. So again, he's fine, he's solid, he's okay. But to me, he is every bit Aaron Rodgers is Mike McCarthy to your Joe Burrow here, if you will. Do I really look at Zac Taylor and believe that he is elevating this organization, someone that I'm overly excited about as the head coach here? Do I watch Bengals games and say, wow, these play designs on the offense are cutting edge, or that he's really got a tight grip on the control of this game via his play calling, like I often do with so many of the top offensive coaches in the league? No, I don't. And beyond me thinking he's just a good, not great offensive mind, just in terms of being a head coach and having his team with the right culture and being ready to play, one of my biggest frustrations with this Bengals team is how 3 straight years they have come out of camp flat and disappointed early and been unprepared to start the season. That has to be some bit of an indictment of your head coach. And the last 3 seasons have featured week 1 losses in 2022 at home in Cincinnati against Mitch Trubisky's Steelers. In 2023, they lost 24-3 in Cleveland against Deshaun Watson's Browns. And last season, they ruined everybody's survivor pool in week 1 when they lost to the New England Patriots as 2-score favorites at home in week 1 against Jacoby Brissett. These are not powerhouse teams. these are big missed opportunities, and we're not talking about an MLB opening day where you can just brush it off if you lose the first game of the season. In a 17-game season, this means a lot. Hell, just last season, if they won that week 1 game against the Patriots, they would have made the playoffs. They would have had the same record as the Denver Broncos, who they beat, and would have had the tiebreaker over them and snuck in as the 7 seed. So these week 1 losses really do matter, and I do think you can hold that against Zach Taylor. So at the end of the day, do I think the Bengals would be better moving on and seeking a little bit more from this key pillar of the organization and their head coach? Yeah, I do, and I'm not afraid to say it, but at the same time, I don't think this team and this organization is one that's going to do that anytime soon. So I think we might as well discuss the scheme and perhaps some of the things that he does do well. And one thing I do like about Zach Taylor and his offense is that he does come from Sean McVay's offensive coaching tree. And over the years, he has really blended that classic play action, wide zone oriented offense that we discuss so much with a Shanahan McVay style offense. He's blended that style with what Brian Callahan, his offensive coordinator for many years, now the head coach in Tennessee, really stepped up and helped introduce, notably in that 2022 season when they were going through some struggles, in more of that kind of modern pro spread style approach, which fits Joe Burrow's skill set as a drop-back passer and surgeon from the pocket so well, something he did a lot more quick passing out of shotgun at LSU. And last year, we really saw these two kind of core philosophies merged together in a consistent, diverse offensive game plan for the Bengals, where they were 8th in the league last year in terms of running 12 personnel with 2 tight ends, and did some really good stuff on early downs, where they finished 3rd in the NFL in EPA added on first down last season, while also having a blend of that 11 personnel shotgun oriented Joe Burrow passing game, where he can really spread you out and pick you apart from the gun with these wonderful playmakers. And I think on top of that too, he has certainly cleaned up some of the frustrating predictability aspects of what we saw earlier in his tenure, where for the first few years in Cincinnati, felt like teams knew exactly what was coming. This team ran the ball about 55, 56% of the time on first downs, and it felt like it was almost always just a wide zone run into a brick wall that the defense knew was coming. Felt like at times early in Zach Taylor's career, they would just waste first downs, and that was a common criticism of Zach Taylor from myself and many others. I do think he has diversified the run game a little bit, but done a much better job of passing more on early downs and bringing, that play action passing attack to the table a little bit more than they had earlier on here. So, he has made some worthwhile adjustments over time here. They've kind of slowly figured some stuff out. And for what it's worth, last year, other than week 1, where this team again is just incompetent, and Zach Taylor's got to prove that that's not going to be the case every single year. But other than week 1, this was the most consistent full season of just having a legit, balanced, reasonable offensive approach and having their shit together, schematically speaking. So it's possible that another year of this, you could talk me into being a little bit higher on Zach Taylor here. And I do think some of this praise is still reflected in what is a solid pass game coaching grade. Like I said, it ranks 14th to 21st, so it's at least respectable there. I don't mean to just pile on Zach Taylor. I think he's fine, solid, adequate. But is that really what you want to marry with Joe Burrow, who's going to come with perennial Super Bowl expectations? I think it's worth begging the question. So hopefully we do just continue to see year-to-year incremental growth from Zach Taylor, which I do think we've seen, and maybe we can reach a point where this team can, go to the big dance and get it all done, as they got so close to doing, in large part thanks to the defensive performances of Lou Anarumo's defense in 2021. And speaking of the defense and trying to get back to that status, we've got to talk about Al Golden here, who's going to replace Lou Anarumo. And this is going to be a much shorter conversation for me because I'm just not overly familiar with Al Golden from a scheme point of view and sort of what he wants to do with this defense. I can look at those coaching trees that he's been a part of. He was here in Cincinnati in 2020 and 2021 under Lou Anarumo, so you would imagine there will be at least some continuation of the sort of balanced overall 4-2 style defensive approach that they had here under Lou Anarumo. But just before that, he was with Matt Patricia in Detroit, who run a much different kind of Bill Belichick style defense. So a lot of different coaching influences there that he's worked with recently in the NFL, as well as Terrell Austin in Detroit in 2016, 2017. So he's spent some time as an assistant to the defensive coordinator, but has not been in full control of his defense at the NFL level. But what he does bring to the table is about 15 years of running his own defense at the college level, 5 years as the defensive coordinator at Virginia to start off the millennium, 2001 to 2005, and then he gets his first head coaching gig at Temple, and then stayed in the college ranks there, finished as the head coach in Miami in 2015 before heading to the NFL. So a lot of experience coaching young players, designing a defense, and all of that. And I think that is useful. And obviously Notre Dame has done some really good stuff with Al Golden there in recent years. So reason to be optimistic about the hire. It's going to be kind of wait and see in terms of what style of defense they want to run here. My imagination here is it's going to be some bit of a 4-2 style split safety defense. Because that's just kind of where the NFL is at, and just kind of reading the tea leaves of what Notre Dame's defense looked like last year. Lou Anarumo has some kind of aspects of that style defense as well. So that's kind of what I'm expecting, but we will definitely find out and have more to discuss with what this Bengals defense did, schematically speaking, in next year's deep dive, reflecting upon what Al Golden puts together here. But kind of entering, even though he is an older coach with lots of experience, entering the league with kind of go prove it rankings as a first-time defensive coordinator here. C grades across the board is kind of what we go with these types of hires. And that obviously kind of makes him a wild card for this Bengals team. If he can come in and hit the ground running right away and prove to be a great hire for the Bengals and elevate this Bengals defense in a way that Lou Anarumo wasn't able to do, unfortunately, the last year and a half, well, that's going to go a long way in terms of the Bengals exceeding this 15th power ranking and getting them, most importantly, closer to their expectations of being a playoff contender. But with that out of the way now, we will get into this roster breakdown. But first things first, I want to thank the sponsor for today's video, SeatGeek, the #1 ticketing app out there on the market. You guys, we have a little bit of summer left, so go out, enjoy a ball game, enjoy a concert. SeatGeek will have you covered. They guarantee you get the most bang for your buck with market competitive prices, but a great user interface that color codes every seat. So you just look for the green dots and you know you are getting the best prices available. They even give you images of what your seats are going to look like, so there's no surprises with columns or bad views of whatever it is you're going to experience. They also, unlike some other apps that I've used, will get you your tickets right there in that wonderful SeatGeek app, so you don't have to jump through different apps and logins and email chains and have this stressed out experience as you approach the gate. They make things nice and easy for you, so you can just relax and have a great time at the game, at the concert, wherever you're headed. And right now, if you guys use code TFG10, you will save up to $20 on your next purchase. You'll support my channel in the process, save some money, and I hope you just have a great time as well, wherever it is you're headed. But now let's get started with the roster breakdown, where we begin discussing Joe Burrow and this quarterback room. As far as the offseason changes here, very little to mention. They are bringing Desmond Ridder back to Cincinnati, where he played his college ball. That's a big loss for this Bengals quarterback room. But as a QB3 here, hopefully shouldn't see the field, and I can say that the quarterback room is staying neutral. At least if he plays, that means something went horribly wrong, and this team might be looking at the number 1 pick next year. But let's go ahead and discuss Joe Burrow, where I've got him ranked, what we think about Joe Shiesty here. So I have Joe as the 4th overall quarterback, but 2nd in passing grade. All of these top quarterbacks are so tight right now. So spoiler alert, some of these guys that are more designed rushing threats, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, surpass him slightly in the overall quarterback ranking, whereas Joe Burrow, not much of a design runner. In fact, all of his design runs, I think, were QB sneaks last year. He had 20 designed rushes for -4 yards, so obviously not quite bringing that X factor in the ground game that some of these other guys are. But it is worth noting that with Patrick Mahomes, 2 straight seasons, or at least regular seasons, of not being the best quarterback in the NFL and showing that he is human and not winning the Super Bowl this year, I do think that sort of Patrick Mahomes is 1A and then these other guys are 1B in the elite tier. That split has been cut off, and I think Joe Burrow now finds himself on that top shelf with the other 4 quarterbacks, which means, hey, maybe the season ends and we are talking about Joe Burrow as the best quarterback in the NFL, but obviously elite of the elite. If you argue that at this point, I don't know what to tell you. Last year, Joe Burrow really did his best Drew Brees impression, putting a bad football team on his back, getting into shootouts every single week with horrible defensive production. And if there ever was an MVP candidate on a 9-7 football team, it's what Joe Burrow did last season. 43 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, just short of 5,000 passing yards, and just generally historic efforts week after week with spectacular plays on tape to help this team stay in the playoff hunt. So in terms of a what would this team be without this guy argument for the MVP, like if you replace this guy with the Andy Dalton line of quarterbacks, who drops off the most from what they were? Yeah, the Bengals only won 9 games, but with just a baseline adequate quarterback, they might have been a 3 or 4 win team last year, whereas the Ravens and Bills probably, still probably 7-8 win teams in my opinion. Now, I'm not saying he was my vote for MVP. I did say Josh Allen last year. But Joe Burrow certainly had a case. And to be fair, I made the same case for Josh Allen in last year's deep dive about him really putting the 2023 Bills on his back. And he did have the MVP season and finally won the award. So maybe that'll happen with Joe Burrow. But as a player, he doesn't have the traits of these other 3 elite quarterbacks, at least in terms of raw arm talent especially. But also not the athlete of Allen and Lamar, and probably not even Patrick Mahomes either. But I do think he sets himself apart in terms of clearly having the best mind for the quarterback position that we have in the game right now, in terms of processing, timing, anticipation, that field general mentality. He's got it all. He is the closest thing we have today to what Peyton Manning was in his prime, what Tom Brady, Drew Brees were in their prime. His ability to always know where the ball needs to go, walk up to the line, anticipate what coverage he's going to get, know what beaters he has within that play call against that coverage, and then post-snap to react to any sort of, rotating safeties that change the look after the play to quickly react, know what the new coverage is, and know where the ball needs to go. He's got that all figured out. And to do that inside an offense that, I'm just being honest, it puts more pressure on Joe Burrow to be that field general than what Andy Reid asks of Patrick Mahomes, than what Josh Allen has asked in Joe Brady's offense, and what Lamar Jackson's asked in his offense in Baltimore as well, that does a lot of stuff with play action and stuff on earlier downs to help him out. Now, as we mentioned, Zach Taylor did a little bit more to help Joe Burrow on earlier downs, but third down drop back passing game, it's essentially all Joe Burrow doing his thing. And for him to have reached a point where he was still under 2% in terms of turnover worthy play percentage, single digit interceptions compared to the 4,900 passing yards and 43 touchdowns, he's just seeing the game at an elite of the elite level right now. Not to mention pairing the processing with the anticipation to throw the ball before receivers begin their break and throw guys open against man coverage. Yes, he's got these great wide receivers, but make no mistake about it, Joe Burrow is helping these guys reach the heights that they are achieving right now as well. And then I also would make an argument that Joe Burrow, right now at least, is the most accurate quarterback in the NFL to all three levels. His deep ball, the touch he's throwing on it right now, it's as good as it's ever been. I would argue his arm talent has actually gotten better on tape over the years, which is something that can happen. I think Tom Brady improved his arm over the years. I think we've seen that with a guy like Dak Prescott as well. There's things you can do to train your body and in your mechanics to improve your ball velocity. I think we're seeing that from Joe Burrow, getting a little bit more distance on these deep balls, but still having that incredible touch and placement and consistently hitting his target on the deep ball, making these deep targets to T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, among other guys, so accurate, so catchable. It has that Russell Wilson moonball to it. It's just a thing of beauty to watch. And in terms of just sheer volume of missed throws on intermediate targets, short targets, Joe Burrow just doesn't have those really. So I think accuracy, processing, timing, and anticipation, Joe Burrow's got the crown in those departments, and that's how you're able to have an elite tier 1 quarterback, even if he isn't the most sensational athlete, even if he isn't, the strongest arm quarterback in the league. But we also can't talk about Joe Burrow without mentioning the fact that he has some of the best pocket presence, ability to elude sacks and extend plays out of the pocket. We can't have a Bengals deep dive without me calling back to my pro comp on him, where I said he is Tom Brady from the waist up and Aaron Rodgers from the waist down. In terms of some of that mobility and athleticism and ability to extend plays, he's got that as well, which obviously contributes to elevating the team and making something out of nothing when he needs to, but not doing it when he doesn't need to as well is just as important. So I'm as big of a Joe Burrow fan as you will find out there. I have consistently defended him in these deep dives throughout the years, and it's so great to see him have the success, at least within the offense. And you're going to find very few arguments from people other than those Justin Herbert fan accounts on Twitter. You're just not going to really see a whole lot of argument that Joe Burrow is an elite quarterback in, I think this year we have as clear of a picture in terms of who the big four are, the elite four quarterbacks in the AFC. He's one of them. So you've got that. You're going to be in the playoff picture. And then kind of depending on so many of the other things we have yet to talk about with this team, that's really where this Bengals team is going to, be they're going to make or break their season. They're going to be made or broken. You know what I'm trying to say there. So with that, let's move forward with this deep dive. Not as much to say about the backup room. We already trashed on Desmond Ridder, one of my favorite quarterbacks to pile on in the league, because I don't think people realize how bad his tape is until you actually get into it. But Jake Browning is the backup here. As I mentioned it in the coach breakdown, he did some good stuff in that 2023 season, showed that he is a competent backup, just kind of like a very, 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 very poor man's Joe Burrow, with some of the processing and anticipation and ability to run this offense. Kind of your backup's backup, and it's fine enough to have him. If Joe Burrow's going to get banged up for a week, you can run the same offense, and hopefully the defense steps up that week and you can lock into a win. But let's move forward and discuss the Bengals weaponry here. And as far as offseason changes here, very little to speak of. The wide receiver room is staying exactly the same, as they did extend T. Higgins here. But they did recently make a addition in the tight end room with Eric All. Unfortunately, the injuries just continue to follow him. He's going to miss this season. And with that news, they go back to the Iowa tight end well with a more established talent in Noah Fant, who was recently released by the Seattle Seahawks. A sneaky little pickup there and a slight upgrade to the tight end room. But just as you didn't really come to this video for me to tell you that the Bengals have a really good quarterback, you probably don't need me to tell you that the Bengals have an excellent group of weapons, where they do come in tied for first in the league for me with two other teams. You can probably guess who those other two teams are, but in case you can't, I'll leave it as a spoiler for deep dives to come. But an A-plus grade, as good as it gets, really, with this group of weapons, which is obviously paired with an elite quarterback. It's pretty crazy to think that this team only ranks 15th in these power rankings. So again, plenty more to get into here, but let's at least discuss and celebrate this group of weapons, where you do have, in my opinion, the best wide receiver duo in the NFL. Definitely some good debates there, but I would give it to the Bengals. Highlighted by Ja'Marr Chase, who, it's weird to say fully broke through last year, but he really did fully break through, reaching his unbelievable potential, and for the first time in his young career, threatening someone like Justin Jefferson for the question of who is the best wide receiver in the league. I mean, what can this guy not do? Wins the Triple Crown last year with 1,708 yards, 17 touchdowns, and 127 receptions, one of the all-time great wide receiver seasons. And skill set wise, he absolutely is the definition of that true elite alpha number one, which to me is a receiver who can threaten to all three levels of the defense, produce after the catch, win tough catches, and ultimately be the player that you can funnel your offense through. No doubt, Ja'Marr Chase checks all of those boxes. Now, if there is one, I guess, ding or just comment here, I don't rank him above Justin Jefferson yet. I think he had a season last year that's now threatening Jefferson for that. But he did have a drop rate of 7.3% and came down with 10 out of 24 contested catch targets. 42%, that's good, but not exceptional. That is at least a commentary I have on his game in a negative light that I wouldn't have on Justin Jefferson, that does all of the other things as well, but also has even better ball skills, I would say. And I guess that now makes me a Ja'Marr Chase hater. But if he can even clean up some of those drops, improve that contested catch win rate, and repeat what he did last year, we very well might be coming here next year and putting that crown icon next to Ja'Marr Chase. But anything short of that, I have no negative notes on Ja'Marr Chase. And even if I'm not saying he's the overall number one wide receiver, I would say he's number two in the league. I will at least give him credit before we move on from him and say he is, I think with Deebo Samuel regressing last year, he is clear-cut the best run-after-catch wide receiver weapon in the NFL right now. So at least he gets the crown in that individual trait. Finishes second in missed tackles forced behind just Garrett Wilson, who's super slippery, but does finish number one in yards after the catch by a lead of 100 yards there. Number two was Khalil Shakir, who gets almost all of his targets underneath, where there are even more run-after-catch opportunities than Ja'Marr Chase. And then next down after that was DJ Moore, who I think is probably second in my mind in terms of run-after-catch threats. At the wide receiver position, he's kind of a diminished, tuned-down version of Ja'Marr Chase as another true number one. But DJ Moore was 200 yards behind Ja'Marr Chase in yards after the catch. So you see him catching those in-breakers, having the acceleration to break short angles from these safeties and slot corners, and then the speed to pull away. Like some of these plays he had after the catch, it was like he got the star in Mario Kart. Like it was crazy, man. So love me some Ja'Marr Chase. How can you not? And then you pair him with T. Higgins, who gets the extension here. And there was a lot of talk about, should the Bengals have done this? Should they have put resources elsewhere? I'm not going to lie, man. If I'm in the Bengals' shoes and you've got this set up and you do one thing better than anybody else in the league with a quarterback wide receiver duo that is untouched in the league right now, it's really hard to break that up, man. Especially when T. Higgins is just such a perfect complement here. When Ja'Marr Chase is as diverse and explosive and efficient as he is, they want to line him up in the slot sometimes, move him left to right, throw the ball to him on any different type of route. And like I said, truly funnel the offense through Jamar Chase, any play where he is not the first read might be an inefficient play design for the Bengals. So that is what this offense is designed to do, is to funnel the ball to Jamar Chase. But as defenses shade towards him, even double team Jamar Chase, or anticipate that the ball is going to go to him, to have T. Higgins line up on the outside for the vast majority of plays as a true X, oftentimes against number 2 corners, because any team that does shadow their number 1 corner is going to put him on Jamar Chase. So T. Higgins just has to beat number 2 corners. And he runs a simplified X wide receiver route tree that Joe Burrow is going to always know where he is, which is essentially stop routes on the outside, go balls, and dig routes for the most part. He's going to do some other stuff, but that's essentially what he's here to do. And when you are 6'4", 220 pounds, an outstanding contested catch ball winner, and have over the years now built up that chemistry with Joe Burrow where, okay, if Jamar's covered, Joe is able to snap to T. Higgins and know exactly where he's going to be, how he's going to react to the throw in so many different scenarios. If T's running a dig, Joe knows he can throw it underneath. T's going to be QB friendly. He's going to round that route back around the zone coverage, on the same page with Joe Burrow. Back shoulder comebacks. I mean, this is huge here. If it's man coverage and Jamar doesn't get open, or that safety does shade over the top of Jamar Chase, you know T's going to have that one-on-one to the boundary, and the back shoulder comeback with an accurate throw and a big wide receiver like T. Higgins, it's an indefensible pass. It might not always get completed because the throw does need to be perfect and the receiver does have to make a tough sideline catch, but the probability of that ball getting intercepted is essentially nothing. And you think back to like Aaron Rodgers and Jordy Nelson having that back shoulder chemistry. It does take some time to develop that kind of stuff. And T and Joe Burrow have that built up now, which again makes sense why they didn't want to lose him and lose that established chemistry where they can just come in and hit the ground running and maybe not lose week 1. And those are just a couple examples of some of the chemistry and communication that T and Joe Burrow have built up over the years. So just the perfect 1-2 pairing. Again, in my opinion, the best wide receiver duo in the NFL, and obviously the core makeup of why the Bengals rank with an A+ grade and tied for first in overall weapons. And then when you have that setup, this is a perfect example of something I have mentioned with other teams where I do think there is something in the NFL at a certain point of having too many mouths to feed. I think there can be a law of diminishing returns in a setup like this, or I've discussed this in Philadelphia as people in like mock drafts and free agent projections and stuff have said, oh, the Eagles don't really have a number 3 wide receiver. They should go find that guy. Well, it does reach a point where if you put in another piece that has expectations to be involved in the offense, or you're paying that person to be involved in the offense, or spending a first-round pick on that guy to be involved in the offense, whatever it might be, there does reach a point where all you're really doing is taking away targets from Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, where those two guys right there are already essentially impossible for defenses to handle. And it's actually much more healthy to just stay efficient with those targets and then fill out the rest of your room with kind of role players that have specific skill sets that don't really have big expectations to emerge as star players or key contributors or anything like that. The only downside of that is, yeah, if one of these guys gets hurt, and to be fair, T. Higgins, the one real knock on him for what he is and what they paid him is he does have to stay healthy. I mean, he's missed like 5-6 games seemingly every year. Would be great if that didn't happen this year. I don't know if I'm quite going all the way and just calling him injury prone. If it happens again this year, that we'll probably see that medical icon on the T. Higgins graphic next year. But yeah, if T does go down, you do have to ask a little bit more of these guys, obviously. But as long as these guys are healthy, you can really just kind of go down the pecking order and talk about how these guys fill in the right roles for what they need from them. And the next guy to talk about here would be, quote-unquote, tight end Mike Gesicki. Now, you have to use the term tight end very loosely here. He only played 65 snaps out of 525 for the Bengals last year as an actual inline tight end. Mike Gesicki is first and foremost this team's slot wide receiver. Now, how they get him into the slot will vary. Like, they run a lot of 12 personnel, like we mentioned earlier. So they're going to kind of use that mismatch problem where you've got two tight ends in the huddle where the other guy is going to be either Drew Sample, who's more of a blocking specialist, or Noah Fant, who we'll talk about. Hopefully will force defenses to come out in heavier packages, ideally 4 defensive backs on the field in a base defense. But then you can come out and that tight end is in line, and you might be in a 2x2 spread formation with Mike Gesicki in one slot, Jamar Chase in the other slot, with someone like Andre Iosivas or Jermaine Burton as the other outside wide receiver with T. Higgins there. Or it will be a 3x1 formation with both Gesicki and Chase in the slot. And that is really how you should be thinking about Mike Gesicki. He's not here to block. And you take that flexibility plus what he brings to the table from a skill set perspective, it's really a nice third piece to have here where, no, you're not required to feed the ball to Mike Gesicki, but with the types of routes he's going to run in the short to intermediate game as a big-bodied target who came down with 56% of his contested catch targets last year, 9 of 16, just 2 drops on 82 targets. He is that reliable possession target in a pinch for Joe Burrow. He's not a huge part of your passing progressions, right? But if defenses are going to find a way to take away Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, Joe Burrow is the perfect quarterback that will work his way to a third read, know where his check down is, know that Mike Gesicki is going to be sitting down underneath or can just box out a linebacker and make a tough catch on a well-placed throw, or Joe will get in a scramble drill and Mike Gesicki will react with him within that 10-yard area just to keep drives alive and help move the sticks. And then, yeah, if he helps block on the wing for Jamar Chase on a bubble screen or whatever it might be, that's an added bonus. While he's not an actual inline tight end, he is an effective blocker from the wing with how they ask him to, be used within this offense. So he's a really nice third piece. But then after Mike Gesicki, you basically just have a nice group of different types of skill sets here that the Bengals can really mix and match how they want to play these guys. Andre Iosivas is definitely the T. Higgins backup. That's a core role that he has here. He is 6'3", 212. He's got similar traits to T. Higgins. So if you are anticipating T to miss some time, that's a big reason why Iosivas is a nice piece to have here. It gives you a nice floor if T's going to miss 4 or 5 of those weeks. Very similar skill set there. You can stack a little bit on the outside, win tough catches, run some digs, bring some of that size to the table. But they will find ways to get those 3 wide receivers out there all together as well. Iosivas can do some of that big slot stuff, similar-ish to a Mike Gesicki, but with a little bit more seam field stretching ability. That's a role that he's, still kind of developing in and figuring out just as much as he is as an outside wide receiver. But there's going to be times where Jamar Chase comes into the slot, and then you've got T and Iosivas as just a couple of bigger-bodied perimeter options as well. So Iosivas is kind of honestly a chess piece right now with how they use him and an adequate big-bodied backup to T. I don't have huge expectations for him to further break out. 6th-round pick in 2023 out of Princeton. I think he's a nice piece for what he is, but he certainly hasn't been consistent enough with some drops and some other issues to be enough where they were willing to let T. Higgins go and have Iosivas fill into that role, basically. So you have a pretty good feeling about him as your 4th receiver in this pecking order. And then Jermaine Burton is, he's your athlete in this group. I would love to put the up arrow on him and say, hey, look out for Jermaine Burton to break out in year 2. I'm not going to do that. I would love to see it, but it really does feel like the character concerns with him are very, very real. There's just been so much stuff that comes out about him, and I just, the talent's there. I don't know that he's necessarily going to go out and, do some really stupid shit that like gets him arrested or kicked off the team or anything like that. But just in terms of like consistently being there mentally in practice and on Sundays to reach a point where he's actually developing and becomes a trusted part of this offense, that's where I'm not ready to take that leap of faith with him until he shows that with any semblance of consistency. But he is extremely physically gifted. He can be plugged in there if he's ready to go as a vertical threat and actually is a fun Z flanker type of wide receiver in some bit of like a Darius Slayton style mold with a little bit more speed. If you want to stretch the field and put extra pressure on the defense, you love what Jermaine Burton can theoretically bring to the table there. So we'll see if that could come along here. That would be fantastic. Like, he has potential to emerge as a tremendous wide receiver 3, but will he reach that potential? I'm certainly not betting on it here. But Charlie Jones and Isaiah Williams are fascinating true slot types. If they do want Chase and Higgins on the outside and want more of a crafty separator from the slot, they have a couple options there. Guys that haven't had big opportunities. Charlie Jones has been pretty roadblocked here, but I think, he's shown his flashes. I liked him coming out of Purdue. I just don't know that the playing time is going to be there necessarily for me to like put the up arrow on him or anything like that. But I think he can handle a small workload in that role. And then Isaiah Williams as well was really crafty at Illinois. He got drafted by the Lions, but couldn't crack that deep wide receiver room since he picked him up. Both those guys are very similar skill sets, and they're clearly looking for that true slot role for some of their third down packages. So those guys I think will get in the mix and can do a little bit of something. And then I have to shout out Mitchell Tinsley, who this team picked up, ended up going undrafted to Washington. Don't want to spend too much time here, but I saw a lot of Kendrick Bourne in his game. Another potential slot option for this team, makes tough catches over the middle of the field. Kind of that physical, gritty possession slot, if you will. Didn't get an opportunity in Washington, but I'm not quite ready to write him off either. Was a prospect, one of my guys. Down the board a little bit. So we'll see if he makes the team. But had to give him a shout out at least. And we'll see if he generates any buzz in camp. But then you do have to get back to the tight end room. It'll be interesting. Noah Fant comes in here. This to me felt like kind of a why not addition for the Bengals. I don't think he's going to overtake Mike Gesicki. Even if Noah Fant's probably been a better overall receiving tight end than Gesicki over the last 3 years, though Gesicki established his role within this offense and that trust with Joe Burrow, gets the contract extension here. So I don't think he's being brought in to take snaps away from Mike Gesicki in that role. And I don't think he's really going to take away Drew Sample's 654 snaps as their tight end last year. Honestly, Drew Sample is their starting tight end. They like what he does from a run blocking perspective. He played more total snaps than Mike Gesicki last year, overall. And in terms of being an actual tight end, it's not even close. Drew Sample played 590 snaps as an actual tight end, whereas Mike Gesicki only played 523 snaps total. Again, 65 as a tight end. So I don't think Noah Fant, who's not that great of a blocker either, is really going to take those snaps from Drew Sample. I really think it was just kind of good timing for the Bengals, where Eric All gets hurt, who kind of has a little bit of a role in this offense, more in the kind of like Jonnu Smith vision as your kind of wing tight end, a decent blocker, but some athleticism to be more of a receiving threat in under center 12 personnel than someone like Drew Sample, who's just a complete non-factor. I think Eric All gets hurt, and Noah Fant had just been released by the Seahawks. They knew Noah Fant was going to be really cheap, and they're like, hey, there's another athletic Iowa tight end that's just what we were hoping Eric All could become for us as a role player, and he's just sitting out there to be had. So it's a nice little pickup, and honestly, with that, I mean, even listing Mike Gesicki as a tight end feels like a joke at this point, because I don't know how much Mike Gesicki's ever going to put his hand in the dirt with Noah Fant there. Gesicki is much more Jawan Jennings or Cooper Kupp. If there's a spectrum of Far left is, call it Drew Sample, who's a tight end who's just there to block. And the far right is like a Cooper Kupp, Jawan Jennings role where they're like a half tight end, half wide receiver. Mike Gesicki is like 98% towards the Cooper Kupp, Jawan Jennings side of that meter. So it's a fun group of three quote-unquote tight ends. And I like the Noah Fant pickup for what it is. I don't think it makes a huge impact or anything like that, but he's a nice player to have. And if Mike Gesicki gets hurt, Noah Fant can go, step out wide and do some of that stuff too that Mike Gesicki's good at. So why not pick him up? Then you're going to have Tanner Hudson, Tanner McLaughlin, a day 3 draft pick from last year. Either both make the team or competing for that 4th tight end roster spot. Hudson, a balanced backup possession tight end, and McLaughlin I liked with some field stretching ability out of Arizona. Not quite ready to quit him, though. Them bringing in Noah Fant kind of tells me they weren't prepared for him to be that next man up with the injury. And then we haven't even mentioned the receiving backs. Chase Brown will play his role, especially in the screen game and as a dump down threat. But really athletic dude, really explosive. He is a part of the picture here. Another nice ancillary option for Joe Burrow to work to if he's actually not throwing the ball to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. So that does help. And then Samaje Perine will get in the mix because he's one of the better pass blocking backs in the league and is actually a handful on dump downs and stuff. So it's probably going to be a 50-50 split between Perine and Chase Brown. And then we'll see if Taj Brooks in time can come along in that role as well as the day 3 rookie pick out of Texas Tech. But it's a really, really fun group of weapons. They've really figured out how these guys plug in. It's a clean pecking order. The talent all lines up. This is just a sensational group, really from top to bottom. But let's go to the backfield now, where we do see some shakeup this offseason from the Bengals. A couple losses here. So Zach Moss actually didn't recover well from his injury, and he gets released here. He played a quarter of their snaps as the backup to Chase Brown last year, and then Khalil Herbert they acquired. I want to say that was because of Zach Moss's injury, and he played a little bit. He heads to Indianapolis, where Zach Moss last came from. Bit of an Indy Cincy pipeline with those running backs. But they make some additions as well. Taj Brooks in the 6th round out of Texas Tech. Nice draft pick in a deep running back class there. And Samaje Perine comes back to Cincinnati where he started his career. Or he may have actually started in Washington, but started to make a name for himself once Cincy got him. That was a long time ago. Perine's been in the league for like 10 years. But yeah, let's break this group down. They are a top 20 running back room, in my opinion, just breaking into that top 20 there. They rank 18th to 20th with a B- grade, essentially all thanks to the breakout of Chase Brown last year. And Brown was one of the rare draft hits for this Bengals front office, but an excellent use of a 5th round pick. Really, by his talent and how productive he was at Illinois, there is no reason he should have fallen to the 5th round, but good on the Bengals for taking a chance on him. And man, it was fun last year to see him really earn the bulk of carries in this backfield. At first, they were treating him as a little bit more of an undersized scat back, going to Zach Moss. But it became very clear, Zach Moss started to get banged up, and Chase Brown was just so much more efficient that by season's end, he was the guy getting 18, 19, 20 plus carries in this backfield. And even despite the slow start, he came so close to 1,000 rushing yards. He finishes with 990 yards. And the only reason he didn't get that is because he had a selfless play, gave himself up at the goal line, week 17 against Denver, hurts his ankle on like a non-contact awkward fall to the ground because he was giving himself up, and then he wasn't able to play week 18 where surely he could have had at least 10 rushing yards to get to 1,000 yards. So if you're talking about a guy with, you look at the narrative from last year, and does he have the trajectory to get an even larger workload and produce even more from a fantasy football angle? I think Chase Brown as a buy candidate in fantasy makes a lot of sense. And in terms of real football for the Bengals, Yeah, he should be set up to be a really effective back for the Bengals. The high-end plays from him speak for itself. He's got a ton of juice. He's got contact balance. He made 40. He had 46 missed tackles forced last year, which was really good. That placed him 13th in the league, and then he was 20th in yards after contact. So there is just a lot to like with Chase Brown. I think the vision coming out of Illinois was always spotty and inconsistent, DeAndre Swift-esque at times, but I think he has shown development there, and he's a guy that kind of came from the Canadian ranks, was a later breakout at Illinois, a little bit of an older prospect that kind of had to find his way. So I think he's still developing a little bit in the sense of vision. Didn't really feel like as much of a problem for me watching him last year. Maybe the occasional missed read or the occasional bounce outside, but not a huge problem. And yeah, he's not the biggest guy. He's a little bit on the smaller side. So if you're talking about like long-term projection on Chase Brown, eventually I think the Bengals will want to be a little bit more conscious of like giving this guy 260 carries a season, and if he can hold up in that role. And if it is a 3rd and 1 goal line, short yardage situation, are there going to be bigger bodied backs that maybe would be more effective at converting those short yardage situations? Yeah, probably. So those would be maybe the dings on Chase Brown, but at least for now, man, like he's in year 3 of a super cheap rookie contract as a 5th round pick. As we'll discuss, they don't really have another guy to try to force into this backfield. Like, I think we see at least 250 carries for Chase Brown this year, if not more. And then, yeah, maybe if you're in a dynasty league as he heads into a contract year, maybe you do think about shopping him a little bit, because the long-term projection on him is more of a lightning to another guy's thunder. I see a lot of James Cook in his game, where the Bills are kind of running into that dilemma as well in terms of like just where does the line get drawn of like how much we value a smaller back like this, as explosive as he is. But again, for this year, the Bengals got the goods in Chase Brown, in my opinion, and I'm excited to see a full season really of him, hopefully. But yeah, like I said, the backups here, there's not a ton kind of forcing the ball out of Chase Brown's hands right now. Samaje Perine's here for a specific role, and that is to get out there on 3rd down, hang in there in pass pro, catch some checkdowns. That's what he does best. He is technically an adequate option for those shorter yardage touches. I don't know that he's necessarily more efficient than Chase Brown, because at least, even if Brown doesn't have the size, he at least has the burst to get through a hole quickly. Perine does have very poor acceleration, which is probably the most important trait for a 3rd and 1, situation, even more than being 230 pounds like Perine is. But he's been an adequate runner, especially on draws and some of the shotgun run game stuff that he did a lot at Oklahoma and has done through his careers with the Chiefs. And he's going to get some touches and be okay with his size and experience. But if you're talking about anybody actually kind of breaking through and getting real meaningful touches for this team to kind of relieve Chase Brown a little bit from having to carry the ball 270 times, which I think the Bengals would love to do, fantasy owners would not love to see, but Taj Brooks was a very talented 6th round pick to bring in here. And in a quote-unquote average running back draft class, he'd probably be in a lot of people's top 10 lists, or at least a sleeper to be on people's top 10 lists. In a crazy deep running back class, Taj Brooks did end up with a 4th to a 5th round grade from me, and my tied for my RB13. But there is a ton of Devin Singletary in Taj Brooks's game. A short, stocky, contact balance back with good vision, can get involved in the receiving game, scrappy pass blocker, even if he's not the biggest guy. I really like that comp for him. And if he can have a good camp and start to get into the mix here early, he would be the threat to your Chase Brown, fantasy pick. I still don't think you're going to regret it drafting Chase Brown. He's still going to get the big workload here, and his explosiveness is going to get you some big games. But Taj Brooks definitely has the talent as a 6th-round pick to emerge as a sort of innings eater type of running back here that maybe does get 120 touches and does some good stuff, kind of like Chase Brown was as a later draft pick here. Very different type of player, but could this, for the Cincinnati Bengals, not to just focus on the fantasy angle, from their perspective, could this turn into a really good, balanced, cheap backfield for them for the next 2 years as they're sorting through a lot of this contract drama? Yeah, absolutely. So I'm excited for Taj Brooks. Hope to see him get an opportunity here, unless I draft Chase Brown in fantasy, in which case I'm fine with Chase Brown just getting 270 touches. But yeah, that's your core 3 running backs here that make up a very solid backfield that, again, ranks 18th to 20th in the league. This is maybe not a superstar backfield, but it is certainly not a problem for this Bengals team, and you absolutely get a little bit of everything, including some of that explosive big play potential that you look for in Chase Brown. And you might want my thoughts on the other backs competing for maybe an RB4 spot, though I wouldn't be surprised if they just keep those 3 because they do have a deep wide receiver and tight end room. Milton would maybe be the guy I would keep an eye on if anything happened to Samaje Perine, because he does have a lot of size. Was a nice kind of big-bodied prospect coming out of Georgia for what he is, but maybe a practice squad option and could be called up in the events of injury. But let's move forward to the offensive line, our last position group for this offense. A little bit of movement this offseason, nothing major. I have them staying as neutral in terms of if they got better or worse this offseason on the O-line. But they do lose Alex Kappa, who really struggled last season. He's going to be competing for a starting job for the Raiders. But he did play 99% of their snaps. Filling those shoes, likely to be Lucas Patrick, a veteran center/guard, coming over from most recently New Orleans by way of Green Bay and Chicago. But they do spend a pair of mid-round picks on Dylan Fairchild and Jalen Rivers in the 3rd and 5th round, respectively. And there is a little bit of a poetic beauty with this Bengals deep dive in terms of the order that I do all these deep dives, because it starts as good as it gets with the quarterback and the weapons. The backfield was pretty solid to good. And now really the rest of this entire deep dive is going to be a negative conversation. I mean, outside of what we've just talked about, this roster has so many question marks, so much to prove, not a ton of talent. And that begins with the offensive line, where I have the Bengals ranked as the 30th overall offensive line in the league. They struggled last year, and as we just mentioned, they didn't get better, really. Hardly invested in this group. I have them ranked 27th to 29th with a C- grade in pass blocking, and run blocking is tied for dead last in the league. But let's go through this unit. You know, at left tackle, you at least know what you have in Orlando Brown. There's not a ton to say about him at this point. There was a point in time where I would have gone on a rant about how he's overrated and demanding trades and high-end contracts. You know, just wasn't the type of player he is. But he's settled in as a capable, fairly compensated left tackle here for the Bengals. He is a massive individual that is very challenging to get around in pass protection. At times you can do it. You can outquick him, certainly, if you have a lot of speed and bend or can use that to threaten with inside counters. You will see some losses on Orlando Brown. He's just not a good athlete. But his size and his anchor and his grip strength are spectacular, and he's got good enough technique where he is, generally speaking, a good pass protecting left tackle. That lack of athleticism does show up in the run game, though, quite a bit. You would think a guy his size would be a great run blocker, but it's actually very counterintuitive a lot of times when you watch his tape. A lot of being a good run blocker is just flying off the ball, getting your head inside, reaching landmarks, and winning leverage. And he struggles to do all of those things due to his height and his poor get-off and his sloppy athleticism, frankly. He's just not a natural run blocker. Yeah, if you're running a combo block on a, inside shade of Orlando Brown, he can work with the guard and detonate you off the ball. But that's about the extent of his usefulness in the run game. So he's a good starting left tackle and the most high floor aspect of this offensive line. At left guard, next to him, you have your biggest question mark and the biggest wild card of this offensive line. Right now, we are looking at a potential turnstile liability at this left guard spot. Right now, it seems Dylan Fairchild, their third-round pick out of Georgia, is poised to take this job. While that will excite Bengals fans that your mid-round draft pick is quote-unquote winning this job right now, I will remind you of when Cordell Volson did this a couple years ago, because Cordell Volson didn't have anybody else to beat and the Bengals overdrafted him and he had to play. Dylan Fairchild, to me, as I watched that Georgia line thoroughly, they had 3 draftable interior offensive line prospects, so I did 4 games on those guys, and my takeaway between Wilson, Fairchild, and Ratledge was it was so clear who the day 3 NFL backup was and who the potential starters in the NFL were. And unfortunately, Fairchild was the former. I saw a guy who was tough, and it's great that he won a starting job on that Georgia offensive line, but I saw a guy that didn't have a ton of play strength, that was very uncoordinated as an athlete, always felt like he struggled to pair his lower body movements with his upper body movements, always kind of out of position, didn't anchor well in pass protection, a lot of issues in his game. I ended up with a 5th-round grade on Fairchild there as a potential backup due to his grit at this position. But for him to be winning this starting job at left guard, I don't know that that's necessarily even a good thing, in that could be saying more about the other options here and your depth at guard than it is about Fairchild himself. And he's kind of right now living off of the exciting draft pedigree. I really hope I'm wrong. I really, really do. But I did say the same thing about Cordell Volson, and we see where we're at now with Volson. And that's not to take victory laps or whatever, but it is a reminder that this team has not drafted well and that NFL GMs in general do make mistakes. Not to say my evaluations are perfect either, though. So we'll see. He's a huge wild card for this offensive line, in that if they're right about him as a 3rd-round pick and a day 1 starter out of the draft, that's going to raise the floor of this offensive line tremendously, because he is the floor. This is a weak link position, and right now he looks like a potential weak link. At center, you have Ted Karras. The only question on him is he is 32 years old. Is he at some point going to see a fall off? But last year was a career year in terms of pass blocking efficiency. He's one of the smarter, more established centers in the league. He's not a great athlete, but he's got enough toughness and play strength to survive from a physical standpoint as well. So you like what you got there, but as a run blocker, he's just very kind of replacement level. It's more what he brings to the table in terms of picking up stunts, calling out pressures, and hanging in pass protection, where you feel good about Ted Karras. They signed Lucas Patrick. You got a lot of experience there now between Karras and Patrick, a couple guys that have played both guard and center. If nothing else, the communication from these two should be lights out. Patrick has been a guy that's been banged up a lot, though, and missed a lot of time for the Saints last year, and already has been banged up in camp. So, frankly, his availability is the biggest question mark on Lucas Patrick, along with the fact that he's also 32 years old, and the wheels could just fall off on him, as things can happen at that age in the league. But generally speaking, when he's out there, you feel pretty good about what you're getting in a tough, adequate athlete with a ton of experience who will take his losses, as he kind of always has throughout his career. But he is kind of a low-end Band-Aid option signing for them, and he played better last year than Alex Kappa played last year, for whatever that's worth. And then at right tackle, you have another major wild card here in Amarius Mims, their 1st-round pick in 2024, who they obviously have very high hopes for, that he's not going to be next in line of a long run of draft busts for the Cincinnati Bengals. I don't think it's heading in that direction. There were some uglier moments from him last year, as you could have kind of expected. I mean, he was so inexperienced coming out of Georgia, but did have good tape at Georgia. But you did expect there was going to be some moments against NFL-level pass rushers where he would get fooled from some of the more crafty pass rushers, setting him up outside, beating him inside. And we did see that. Like, he's just got technical development to have, and he's got to stay healthy as well. He got banged up early in camp last year, and that kind of slowed down his rookie season. I'm not quite ready to say he's an injury-prone player, but you go back to Georgia, getting a little banged up last year. He's got to stay healthy. If he can, I do think he can develop into a really good tackle. I mean, he is, unlike Orlando Brown, as a behemoth offensive tackle, Amarius Mims can move really, really well. I mean, he has as high of upside as you could dream of for a tackle. He was kind of like the Anthony Richardson of tackle prospects, where he, didn't play as much and dealt with some injuries in college, but for the most part, like, you're really excited about his prospects as a first round pick at a premium position of tackle. So big year 2 for him to take that leap, and what sized leap he can take is also going to really contribute to if this offensive line can be better than our 30th overall ranking. Now, in terms of depth, you've got definitely some pieces to talk about here. You've got a couple of other rookies. Jalen Rivers was their 5th round pick. I actually had a higher grade on Rivers than I did on Fairchild. Rivers played a lot of tackle at Miami, but I really liked him as a potential convert to guard prospect. Obviously the draft pedigree, they prefer Fairchild here, but if Fairchild struggles, you've kind of got your tackle situation figured out for now. Could we see a little Jalen Rivers at guard? I wouldn't mind seeing it. I wanted to see more of a mean streak from Rivers in the run game, but he's got a lot of traits, and he really looks the part of an NFL guard. So that's really where I see the potential on him. They've got him listed as a tackle, and to kind of sit and develop behind Orlando Brown, who similarly just doesn't have the best feet for an offensive tackle. I understand that process as well, just kind of fail him at tackle and treat him as an emergency guard as well. But I think he even played some guard at Miami in previous seasons. I only watched his tackle tape, but I could certainly see him being the better player than Fairchild. Then you have Devin Cochran, who had to play 4 games last year. You definitely don't want to see more of that if you're a Bengals fan. But then they did pick up Caleb Etienne as well out of BYU. A nice, they've actually had a nice list of like late dart throws on some of these guys. None of them have surfaced quite yet, but between Caleb Etienne, Matt Lee, Seth McLaughlin, they're all kind of interesting. Lee was a 7th round pick. Etienne and McLaughlin undrafted pickups this year, but Etienne, freaky traits out of BYU. Not great tape, but the types of traits you want to bet on for an undrafted pickup. Let's just keep it down that path and kind of move into the interior of the offensive line. Like Seth McLaughlin's going to have to earn a spot on this team, and maybe they could like do the kind of roster cheat for a guy that's coming off an Achilles tear, where they could just stash him on IR, which would operate as a bonus roster spot for them. Instead of having to cut him and clear waivers and then put him on the practice squad. But definitely if he didn't tear his Achilles in the middle of that Ohio State season, he would have been drafted. And he's got fluid tape. Like, in the image of someone like a Lucas Patrick or a Ted Karras, could he carve out a role as a low-end starters in the league without a lot of traits, but smart dude with fluid movements and a crafty blocker? Yeah, I liked his tape. I had him as kind of an early day 3 type of prospect. So I really like getting him. Keeping him in the state of Ohio too is fun. And then Matt Lee as well, as a guy to develop at center behind Ted Karras, who had really efficient pass blocking tape at Miami, like in his image as well, could potentially work out. So if we're talking about 2026 and Matt Lee and Seth McLaughlin are kind of nice replacements for Karras and Patrick, I'm not saying that's likely. It's obviously not, but it's possible. Cordell Volson, I know we're kind of working in the opposite direction here. Like, he would be the first guy off the bench, I would imagine. And maybe he will just win the left guard spot. They've survived with him as their left guard. They're right for trying to replace him. I just disagree with the direction they went with Dylan Fairchild being that guy. And Lucas Patrick might get banged up, and you got to play Cordell Volson. So he can't pass block. He's tough, and probably the best they have from a run blocking perspective at guard. And they might even be downgrading a little bit from a run blocking perspective with him not starting. But with how bad he's been as a pass blocker, it's hard to argue with it. And then Cody Ford has obviously bounced around the league and struggled to settle in as well. So you've got a bunch of different names there. None of them you really trust. But I would say at least Rivers, Etienne, McLaughlin, and Lee, there's upside for any number of those guys to even emerge as starters into the future. But like I said, this is a major question mark for this team. It does run the risk of holding this offense back, as talented as everything else here is. And for that reason, I do consider this unit a huge wild card for the ultimate success of this Bengals season. Not necessarily that they have this crazy upside to even be like a top half of the league offensive line or anything like that. But there are at least enough kind of question marks here with a rookie in Fairchild that maybe he's just better than I think he is. Lucas Patrick, can he stay healthy and still be good at 32 years old next to a 32-year-old center in Ted Karras? And what kind of leap can Amarius Mims take in year two? If you hit some green lights there, can this at least be like the 24th best offensive line in the league, please? Because that would at least do a much better job of allowing Joe Burrow to play consistently and do what they are capable of offensively. Whereas right now, like, if things go wrong, or even if things just stay as I'm projecting them right here closer to their floor, this offensive line could get in their way some weeks against better defensive lines for sure. But let's take a look at the Bengals offensive summary here, a very polarizing unit where they, despite the offensive line issues, do rank as my number one ranked passing game in the NFL. I mean, this quarterback weapons combination is the defining strength of this Bengals team and one of the defining strengths of the entire league. However, their run game does concern me. Now, their final run game efficiency numbers have been a little bit better than 31st. They've been, kind of top 20-ish over the last couple of years. And I know that's not reflected here by the 31st ranking. I do think the pressure that these receivers and Joe Burrow are able to take off of the run game is real and can lead to some of those efficiency numbers coming up a little bit. Lighter boxes, shotgun runs, that kind of stuff, bigger plays from a guy like Chase Brown. I do still think when you watch the Bengals last year, they weren't able to run the ball when they needed to run the ball. And I think that really matters. And that probably is going to show up as a weakness again for the Bengals, unless that offensive line can take a major leap. But despite ranking 31st in run game, that first ranking passing attack does still get the Bengals to come out as my 7th overall offense. But we're kind of in like a house of mirrors here, because while the offense is kind of one-sided, this entire team reflects as a one-sided team now that we transition to this Bengals defense that we know was horrible last year and put way too much stress on this Bengals offense to win football games last year. But let's go through this unit and talk about what sort of team we might see on this side of the ball this year. And we'll start by taking a look at the offseason changes on this defensive line. So I do see slight upgrades on the interior of the D-line. Sheldon Rankins, by name, is a loss, and by contract is a loss. He just didn't live up to a pretty nice deal that he got after being good in 2023. And, he's going to be a nice pickup going back to Houston. It sounds like he played through some serious injuries last year and just wasn't himself. But in terms of what the Bengals are losing in him, you could argue if they should have, stuck by him and seen if they could get more from him in year two. But he really did nothing for this team last year. Even if he played a quarter of the snaps, he was clearly not what they paid him to be. So considering they have all this other contract drama, I get clearing the books of his deal and moving on. So I don't really consider him a loss from last year's Bengals team. And then Jay Tefele, Zach Carter, who was just another egregious overdraft by this Bengals front office. they're really losing nothing based on what they got from these guys last year. And then some decent additions, especially in TJ Slayton. They give a kind of mid-ranging starter nose tackle deal, like $6 million over the next 2 years. And Taven Bryan is going to kind of high-five Lou Anarumo on the way over from Indianapolis. So yeah, slight upgrades on the interior D-line, nothing major, but should be a little bit better there. And then on the edge, I said hopefully upgraded here. You know, Sam Hubbard is going to retire actually here. Played about half their snaps off the edge last year, so they're going to need someone to fill into those shoes. Hubbard was like the most consistently average number 2 edge that realistically should have been more of a number 3 for like the last 5 years. I don't think it's going to be too hard to replace that with, you know, Shamar Turner. We'll discuss his prospects as a first-round pick, but as a first-round pick, you're hoping that can contribute towards replacing Sam Hubbard. And then, look, they do get Cam Sample back as well, who isn't a star player, but heading into a contract year last year, he went down in camp, and he's back. So can those two guys give you what Sam Hubbard gave you? I think it's hopeful that they can, as we'll discuss. But let's go through this unit. It's very fitting here that we'll start this conversation on the edge with Trey Hendrickson, because let's just say thank God he has ended his holdout and looks like he's going to be a part of this Bengals team this year, because as we'll see as we go through this entire defense, not just this defensive line, it is Trey and the boys out here. Like, there just is not much for this defense to work with, but Trey Hendrickson is a game-wrecking, disruptive force. And I just got to say, it is a shame that, you know, this Bengals team in many ways, with how they don't use a lot of the modern cap manipulation tactics that so many of these teams, if not everybody but the Bengals, use, whether it be void years or the creative ways that these teams can structure these contracts, as long as you're willing to put money in escrow and find the cash and all that stuff. You know, the Bengals just have not participated in those games. They are such an outdated front office run by 6 people. They don't trade draft picks. Like, the fact that they can't figure out how to pay Trey Hendrickson is such a shame, especially when you look inside this division with TJ Watt, who, let's face it, TJ Watt didn't have half the season Trey Hendrickson had last year. And at 30 years old, TJ Watt just became the highest paid non-quarterback in the league for the next few years. And Trey Hendrickson has to look and see that happening. It's really a shame for Trey Hendrickson, but absolute round of applause for Trey for being a team player and saying, you know what, fine, I guess I'll risk injury at 30 years old. If something happens to him, that will be devastating. I hope he's able to find an insurance policy or something that could compensate him. But if something happens to him after the Bengals don't pay him, shame on the Cincinnati Bengals. But at least from a football perspective, thank God he is here, because he is holding this defense together single-handedly, really. He is such a disruptive force as a pass rusher. And I am ready to at least say that Trey Hendrickson deserves to be mentioned as an elite, top-tier pass-rushing player in the NFL. His run defense with shorter arms and maybe saving a little bit of that crazy madman mentality for pass rushing where he can really impact the game. He's not quite where I would say all of the other elite edge rush players are in terms of being a 3-down impact, in the sense that Hendrickson might be kind of in a tier 1B of edge rushers in the league, if that makes sense. Right behind your Bosa, Parsons, Crosby, Garrett, where Watt's been, and I think Hutchinson probably. All above Hendrickson, but you get the point. Like, he is of that magnitude where he alone can get you some bit of a pass rush, and that's effectively what we saw last year and what we're seeing here still this year, unfortunately. But someone that is going to draw constant attention so that you know where you can scheme up your pass rush, knowing where slides and chip help is going to go towards. But not just that, like, he can actually beat double teams at times and still be a highly productive pass rusher, even though a guy like Trey Hendrickson's every year going to be towards the top of the league in terms of, protections sliding towards him and double teaming and chip helping and all that stuff. So yet another 80 pressure, double-digit sack season last year. This guy is just insane. Hopefully the Bengals can figure this thing out and pay him. I really hope they do, because Hendrickson deserves it as a guy that didn't come into the league as a high draft pick, didn't get a huge second contract. He's earned a $35+ million a year contract. He really has. And I don't know how the Bengals got lucky enough that Trey Hendrickson is willing to come back and play for $21 million on this contract that has already been one of the best contracts in the league. One of the rare good things that this Bengals front office did was locating Trey Hendrickson and getting him as someone that wasn't even really a full-time starter in New Orleans for a 3 or $45 million deal. So the Bengals already are in many ways in debt to Trey Hendrickson, but pays to have an elite quarterback and Super Bowl hope, I guess. Very lucky that Trey Hendrickson is back in camp and going to be a part of this team. But as we've more than hinted at, he is doing almost all of the heavy lifting here. There is just not a lot else on this defensive line. They have a couple of highly drafted players in recent years that they're hoping can break through and emerge to help out Trey Hendrickson a little bit more here and be more of an impactful overall unit, because even with Trey Hendrickson here, they still rank with a C+ grade, 23rd to 27th for overall team pass rush, and 21st to 22nd for D-line run defense, and 28th overall for the defensive line. C+ grades across the board there. But let's stick with the edge and their first-round pick in Shamar Stewart. As raw as they get. And if I'm a Bengals fan, I'm terrified of this draft pick, as they just took what is a realistic worst-case scenario for Shamar Stewart in Myles Murphy in the first round 2 years ago. I mean, this is the size, length, power-only profile that so many teams love to gamble on. It's the Tyree Wilson. It's Lucas Van Ness, Trayvon Walker, Rashawn Gary. Mixed levels of results with all these guys, right? Sometimes that power profile can be enough and turn into something real. Montez Sweat is another guy that did work out in this archetype. It's not that they're all flops, but 2 out of 3 kind of are. And you look at Shamar Stewart on his tape. Yes, when he flies off the ball and he throws those hammer hands into college offensive tackles, he can detonate and compress the pocket. And occasionally he will force the quarterback off his spot and, impact the pass that way. But he's not going against college tackles anymore. He's going against NFL tackles that can handle the bull rush much better for the most part. And he's a guy that doesn't have a lick of skill. And I genuinely question if he is a good football player. I don't know that he has the instincts to develop all of the other necessary parts to be a good pass rusher. Those are just my questions. Like the upside and the traits on Stewart, the flashes that he showed, those sell themselves, and they are there. I'm not saying they don't exist, but it's just a tremendous risk taking a Shamar Stewart as high as the Bengals did. And you just pray that they do a better job developing him than they did with Myles Murphy, who this team is all but giving up on at this point by spending a first-round pick on Shamar Stewart. I'm still going to keep things lightly optimistic and put the up arrow on him and see where this goes here. But am I expecting him really to be too much of an impact here in year one? God, I hope he is, man. I'll just say that. But we'll see where this goes with Shamar Stewart. Then you do have some depth here. You got Joseph Asai, who's, I think, settled in as like a decent edge 3, defends the run. He can win with some athleticism and a little bit of power as a rusher. As a third-round pick, he's been an okay player who's going to come in and rotate and be useful for what he is here. And then you do have Myles Murphy, who's still going to get an opportunity to play and compete and show what he has. I'm interested to see if maybe year 3 could be a big one for him. It's just, again, like if all you have is power, and in the case of Myles Murphy, you're not even consistently able to land that, it's extremely easy for NFL tackles to just prepare for the tackle. If they have to react to something else you try, they know you're not going to be overly efficient at it, and they can probably handle it. So can something happen here in year 3 after, honestly, for Murphy, he was a guy that we were kind of making excuses about from his, I can't remember if he was a true junior or a senior coming out, but basically the year before he declared was much better than his final year at Clemson. So you're already kind of making excuses about like, well, you got to go back a year ago and he showed some more stuff. Well, it's now been 3 years since Myles Murphy has played football well. So I'm just not betting on it at all. And clearly the Bengals aren't either. They're essentially replacing him here. Cam Sample's a nice piece to return here as a part of the rotation. I think they'll be happy to get him back. And frankly, can Cam Sample be what Sam Hubbard was as a good early down run defender and even someone that can win occasionally as a pass rusher on third down? Honestly, they're pretty damn close in my mind. So I like bringing him back, but not someone that's going to make a big impact as a starter. Cedric Johnson did eventually get on the field last year as a day 3 pick, and he's a smasher, man. He showed some really good stuff against the run later in the season. So can he kind of edge out some of these other edges, pun unintended there, but higher drafted players? Can he get on the field ahead of them and help this team get to third downs? I think maybe. But that's probably your 6 edge guys there. I don't see Thomas or Johnson making this team. But yeah, it's Trey Hendrickson and the boys with that edge group. And then on the interior of the D-line, you've got some starting caliber players in BJ Hill and TJ Slayton, who, they're the core reason why the Bengals at least rank in the top 2/3 of the league for my D-line run defense ranking. Here, 21st to 22nd is where they came in there. Like, that's a good early down run stopping duo. BJ Hill, who's a really good 3 technique, getting off blocks. As far as pass rushing on Hill goes, capable. If he's your 4th guy on your defensive line, he can win with a little bit of power and skill. Probably going to get you about 25, 30 pressures, maybe 4 sacks, 5 sacks. Like, he's okay as a part of the starters. But right now, we've got him with the 2nd highest pass rushing ranking of all these players. So that's pretty telling right there. He can play the nose if you have to ask that of him. And when Chris Jenkins, who we'll talk about, is out there, BJ Hill will be more of the nose if they are running, if they're not running an even front, but they will run a lot of even fronts where both these guys are, kind of just defending one gap. But BJ Hill can take on some double teams, but he's much more effective as a run defender, getting some of those more ISO'd looks. And that's where TJ Slayton will be in many ways a starter here. I think Chris Jenkins and TJ Slayton probably both could have deserved to be up there, getting a graphic here for the deep dive. But yeah, Slayton's going to play a lot of snaps. They played him to eat up double teams, and that's what he did in Green Bay. He's not a guy that's going to make a lot of plays or even grade out all that well because he is one of these nose tackles that he's not quite good enough to actually split double teams and be this disruptive force in a very damn near impossible ask. Like, there's only a couple of nose tackles in the league that can actually take on a double team and then make a play. So when you look at like the PFF run defense grades on someone like TJ Slayton, it's going to be in the orange or in the red because there's just not really any opportunities for a guy like TJ Slayton to get positively graded plays. But he will have a lot of the plays where you say, thank you, TJ. You didn't get beat on you didn't give up a bunch of ground on a combo block, and you opened up opportunities for the linebackers to make plays. That's what Slayton's there for. He's a big dude with a decent first step, so you will get the occasional pass rush win for him, but he is probably going to come off the field on third downs. And that's where, okay, maybe we're sliding Shamar Stewart inside, or we're putting Cam Sample in there as a 4-eye where he's done some of that stuff. Or Chris Jenkins, we're asking him to win as a pass rusher. But like I said, Chris Jenkins, I think as a 2nd-round pick last year out of Michigan, someone you don't give up on quite yet, and someone that should play quite a bit here, certainly. He doesn't have the size of Hill and certainly not of Slayton, but at least in college, he defended the run really well. His dad played in the NFL for a long time, and watching Junior's technique, you certainly thought he'd be a little better as a rookie, but it's in there to keep good pad level, have that good stack, peak, shed technique. You're hoping this isn't another Michigan defensive tackle like Mozzie Smith, who you thought was going to be really good and just was a total bust for the Cowboys, at least to this point in time. You're hoping that's not the case with Jenkins too, where it's like, what the hell is going on from that group? But I'm still optimistic, especially because he did deal with just some lingering minor injury setbacks and stuff. So we'll see. And I always felt like he had a chance to be, kind of think of like Shelby Harris, which is becoming a little bit more of a throwback, but an undersized defensive tackle that's actually pretty good against the run. Maybe Grady Jarrett-esque. Like, I always thought like he could be an impact as a 3 technique on early downs, and then whatever you got from him as a pass rusher was going to be house money. I haven't seen anything, because of especially the injuries last year, that makes me change that stance on him. I thought as a second round pick, it was a decent, solid, fair value draft pick, if you will. But like, he has really good athletic traits where if he could learn some pass rush moves, maybe learn to hit with a little more power and have a bull rush, like there's traits in there to be more of a pass rusher. It's just, he wasn't really asked to do that at Michigan, and we haven't really seen that from him. So he's certainly someone the Bengals are going to count on and play a lot and see where this goes. Theoretically speaking, with the draft investments there and the athletic potential of Jenkins and Stewart, even though neither of those guys have really shown an ounce of intuitiveness and know-how of how to rush the passer, if you get like a dream best case scenario from those two guys, maybe this defensive line could actually be pretty solid this season. But beyond Chris Jenkins, you've got some pieces here. Like McKinley Jackson was a 3rd round pick last year as well. You don't want to just completely write him off. Honestly, he showed more last year than Jenkins did. He doesn't have the draft pedigree, but Jackson does have traits in there, and I didn't despise that pick. He was really raw coming out, someone that definitely had to figure it out. But I do think down the stretch, like both him and Cedric Johnson, they played with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder and helped this team get into 3rd downs with some of the run defense stuff. Nothing really to say about McKinley figuring things out as a pass rusher, but could be something there, and another guy that could emerge as a part of a decent D-line group. And Taven Bryan makes sense as an addition here because, like I said, I think they will look to take TJ Slayton off the field for pass rush downs, and Bryan as a 3 technique to run stunts, to be a penetrator. He can do some stuff as an athletic defensive lineman. You don't really want him on the field for early downs, but if Slayton and McKinley Jackson and maybe even Chris Jenkins are going to be kind of run defense only players, raising the floor of your pass rushing 3 technique with Taven Bryan makes sense as a cheap addition. And then we'll see if McTelvin, Agim, or any of those undrafted types can make it. Agim has a nice first step and has shown some flashes as a rusher, worth noting at least. But yeah, this is obviously a group that has a lot of work to do. I did consider this group, like the offensive line, a wild card unit for this team, specifically with all of this youth that they have drafted in recent years. Mostly Chris Jenkins and Shamar Stewart, but Miles Murphy, Cam Sample coming off the injury. What does he look like? Cedric Johnson, McKinley Jackson. There is still some theoretical upside for this unit to be certainly better than the 28th overall defensive line, which right now, as we rank these units at their floor, that's where the Bengals are at right now. Like I said, a lot of work to do here with this group. But let's go to the linebackers, where they did make a lot of change this offseason. They say goodbye to 2 core pieces here, frankly. Jermaine Pratt, who's been a mainstay as a starter for them. He certainly wasn't his old self last year, and they are able to save some money moving on from him. So I get why they release him. The Raiders ended up picking up him, and he's going to start for Las Vegas this year, it looks like. But Akeem Davis-Gaither as well, we just talked about in the Cardinals deep dive. He's going to be in the mix for a starting job now in Arizona, and they decided not to bring him back as well. But what they do is add Demetrius Knight in the 2nd round, a nice draft pick there. And then they pick up Oren Burks, kind of a journeyman veteran signing that played lights out for the Eagles in that Super Bowl run after Nakobe Dean went down for them. And then they also spent a 4th-round pick on Barrett Carter out of Clemson. So hard to say, frankly. Honestly, not just the 2 rookies, but Oren Burks, 3 guys that it's hard to know exactly what they're going to get from those dudes. It's not like they got huge contributions from Pratt and Gaither last year, so this could be upgraded, but could also very much be downgraded as well. So to be determined in terms of if they got better this offseason, but let's discuss this group. So you've got your mainstay in Logan Wilson, really good, balanced, do-it-all, LB1 type of guy. I would say he's anywhere from the 10th to 14th best linebacker in the league. And he's, I would say, good in both phases and has shown to be a really good run defender. I mean, his run diagnostics have just gotten faster and faster every year, as what tends to happen at this position. And he's already 29 years old, but still like very much in his prime. Hasn't necessarily like taken that super leap that I think earlier in his career we're like, man, can this guy be more of a superstar linebacker? I wouldn't say he's necessarily taken that jump. Wasn't too much of an impact in coverage last season, though. I think the 4 years before that, you still see a guy that's able to get in the way of passing lanes and read out route combinations and zone coverage and stuff. Like, he's not this crazy quick twitch coverage athlete, but I still trust him in coverage, even if last year he wasn't able to make as much of an impact on the pass defense. But yeah, I don't have too much more to say about Logan Wilson. You feel very good about him here, and he's on a nice contract that lines right up with that as him kind of a top 10 to 15-ish linebacker, a very good but not great player. He's in the middle of a 4-year, $36 million contract, $8 million a year for Logan Wilson. You will absolutely take that. If anything, that's a bit of a bargain. But you do open up, obviously, some questions next to him with very likely a second-round rookie in Demetrius Knight starting there. But I did like Demetrius Knight, and while I had a 3rd-round grade on him, I understood why the Bengals took him in the 2nd, because this linebacker class was absurdly thin, and there was, honestly, 3 guys to get excited about in this draft class, 2 of which were gone already with Jahad Campbell and Schlesinger. So with a big hole there at LB2, I can get behind taking Demetrius Knight here, and he's interesting because he is a much older prospect, a 6-year player that played in 3 different schools, has a bit of a quarterback background, and it shows. Like, he is a really nice coverage player. He understands where quarterbacks are trying to go with the ball. He's not always over aggressive against play action, which is a common theme with these young linebackers. And just a really fluid athlete, man. Like, maybe not necessarily the fastest. Definitely has good to great speed, like 4.58 speed. He can definitely fly around, and it's more than enough to be an impact linebacker at the NFL level. Not necessarily elite speed, but more specifically, just the fluid movement skills. Talk about like hashtag oily hips. Like, he can sink into coverage quickly. These linebackers get twisted and turned and drawn in all these different directions. To be able to move left and right like he can is definitely an asset. As a run defender, really up and down tape. Like, I love his mentality. He's got pretty good diagnostics as a guy that's, he's an older prospect, having played a little more on the offensive side of the ball. Like, he sees things from a different perspective. And I think, in terms of having a linebacker that's going to step in and not be lost right away, like you found that in Demetrius Knight. But he does try to dodge blocks and needs to improve his take-on ability to really thump in between the tackles. And he missed a little bit too many tackles for your liking. Not a weakness, but not at the consistent level you want to see. And that isn't something Bengals fans would like to hear, because if there's a steady criticism of Logan Wilson, it's that he's a non-elite tackler in terms of missed tackle rate, and that was a big issue for Jermaine Pratt last year as well. Hopefully, as a young player, Knight can continue to clean that up and continue to improve his technique. But he's an exciting young player. It's pretty rare that linebackers step in and are good right away. It does happen from time to time. And again, as a 24-year-old prospect, with pretty good diagnostics, pretty good gamble that Demetrius Knight will be ready to do that. So I'm excited to see him. But if he does falter, Oren Burks was a nice pickup. I mean, his tape for the Eagles, you didn't miss a beat with him stepping in for Nakobe Dean. It was one of the underrated narratives of that Eagles Super Bowl run. But he's been just a lights-out special teamer. He forces fumbles on kickoffs. He's just got blazing speed. If nothing else, he's a great asset there. And if you do want to get into like base 4-3 looks, like he's a heat-seeking missile to plug in there. But I think he's developed and shown more over the years. I mean, he was a third-round pick that Packers fans had every bit of reason to be excited about once upon a time. It didn't develop early, but 30 years old now. Linebacker's a late breakout age position, so I like the dart throw on him as well. I think between him and Knight, you shouldn't be too worried about the floor of one of these guys working out as at least a solid, if not kind of streaky, polarizing playmaker type. After that, Barrett Carter, 4th-round pick. I saw an NFL quality backup, a balanced linebacker that once upon a time had a lot of hype, but he's a smaller dude, not a ton of traits. And I didn't see either the playmaking instincts or consistently elite processing at this position to like transcend those traits. Maybe he surprises, but if you're finding a quality backup and base 4-3 linebacker in the 4th round, you could do worse, I suppose. And I did have a 4th to a 5th round grade on him in a very shallow linebacker class. So they clearly were worried about the depth of this position, and special teams is a big part of this as well. So fine enough draft pick. I just don't expect him to really get into the mix. I mean, maybe 3 years down the road, you move on from Logan Wilson if Barrett Carter takes like massive leaps and bounds from a mental development standpoint, but we're far away from that. And then Joe Giles Harris as well has been in the league kind of developing for a while. I remember watching him coming out of Duke, was a decent prospect, ended up going undrafted, but hasn't really gotten those opportunities. But hey, 2020 for the Jaguars, he played 205 snaps and had a PFF defensive grade of 75.6, which is in the green there. So he's got that going for him as well. But that's probably your 5. I don't know that Hayward or John probably N is silent. Probably John Meta. Did I say that right? Both him and Hayward did register snaps on this defense last year, making the game day roster at least, but probably practice squatters for this year unless they surprise. But as far as the rankings for this linebacker group, they came out pretty solid, C+ grades across the board, 21st to 22nd for overall linebacker, but 18th to 21st for coverage, and 18th to 24th for run defense. So it's a solid unit that could be as much as a good unit, depending on what Demetrius Knight brings in year 1 here. But let's go to the secondary here, where unfortunately for Bengals fans, not really any additions here at all. At cornerback, they lose Mike Hilton. I'm a bit surprised they didn't want to find a way to bring him back. He heads to Miami for cheap. But that's a pretty big loss. He was still pretty good for them in the slot last year. The only quote-unquote addition is Daxton Hill is making his return, hopefully, here. He goes down week 5 last year after showing a lot of promise making that move to outside corner, and there's every bit of reason to be excited about his return here. So that is a big addition, hopefully. But I did still say slightly downgraded with that big loss of Mike Hilton in the slot there. The safety, I said neutral. I mean, they didn't make any additions at all. They lose Von Bell, who ended up losing this job to Jordan Battle. Bengals fans might even scoff at the idea of him being a moderate loss there, but it was still a veteran presence earlier on in the season. But obviously, I said neutral overall for the safety room. They're not going to miss Von Bell. They benched his ass. But let's break this group down. A lot to dissect here with this secondary. That's kind of the ultimate wild card. I mean, they're shuffling the deck. They don't even fully know how this thing's all going to play out. But at cornerback, like I said, Daxton Hill makes his return, and I fully expect they're going to want to put him back out as an outside corner. He spent some time as kind of a slot corner / strong safety, kind of playing that nickel role where he's doing a lot more tough man coverage assignments from the slot, having to get more involved in the run, and he struggled with those assignments, but they did kind of, as a last-ditch effort, say, let's make you an outside corner, because he's a guy that has all of the athletic tools as a first-round pick, has speed, size, fluid athletic skills, was good man-to-man in college, and showed some good press stuff in college too. They moved him to outside corner, very reminiscent of when the Dallas Cowboys moved Byron Jones from safety to corner, and he turned into, for a couple years, Byron Jones was a Pro Bowl caliber corner for a couple years there. And Daxton Hill, like, this experiment looked like a slam dunk success, and then he was like the one bright spot on this defense in the first 6 weeks of the season. And then, of course, he went down, torn ACL, and now he's got to prove that he can get back out there and recapture that hype. But a lot of time to recover there, almost a whole year, still young. I think you kind of resume the idea that, okay, we've only seen 5.5 games or whatever it is from him as an outside corner. He looked good when he did it, but a lot of excitement there. Just, kind of reminds me a little bit of Christian Gonzalez. Rookie season, played like 4 or 5 games, looked really good. And then year 2, he's an all-pro caliber corner, in my opinion. Obviously, that's a lot of high praise, but similar idea. Like, it's all in there. It's just he's got to go out and prove it. I'm still optimistic. And honestly, of all the pieces here, he's the one I'm least worried about. It's more about like the recovery from the ACL. I really think the tape was good, and the skill set translating to an outside corner role makes all the sense in the world to me. So I think they're still excited about him, and his return is probably a big reason they didn't add anybody else in this cornerback room. The rest of this group, it's going to have to sort itself out. So Cam Taylor-Britt, total roller coaster season last year. Abused early in the season, gave up a ton of big plays, and then settled back in and looked solid down the stretch to even good down the stretch. That's kind of been the book on his career, is up and down. He's athletic. He's got playmaking instincts. I think as a CB2, if Daxton Hill can emerge as your CB1, you can live with that. At this point, the inconsistency has been so strong that I'm not really ready to put the up arrow on Cam Taylor-Britt in year 3. If that happens, great. But probably of the mindset that you kind of know what you got there. He's a playable option that's going to be more of a week-to-week performer for you in terms of consistency. And then things get really interesting with the sort of CB3 discussion, because I think they view Taylor-Britt and Daxton Hill as outside corners. DJ Turner, also more of an outside corner skill set, more linear speed, not great in run defense, he's a slender player, not a ton of stop-start ability to be more of a slot coverage defender. So with that, right now, our lads, who's pretty good at keeping an eye on camp and who's getting snaps and who's projected to be the starter right now, does have Josh Newton listed as the starting slot corner. And Newton's a physical guy. He made some plays on the ball last year, but I don't really see the physical traits to be a steady, consistent coverage defender at the NFL level really ever. Just my honest opinion on what we've seen from him in college and in his rookie season. I just don't think he moves well enough, but he is physical, at least. Now, he still missed a lot of tackles last season. He missed 16% of his tackles last year, played a little bit of slot, played a little bit outside. They clearly like his toughness and competitive energy. I just can't get that excited if he's your starting slot corner, and I don't know how long that would last if they go that route. Like I said, though, I don't think DJ Turner can be a slot. I think either Daxton Hill, unfortunately, having to kind of be asked to go back inside, which I don't think is ideal for Daxton Hill. I think he's shown his best tape as an outside corner, and you like that trajectory for him, a la Byron Jones. But he's done that stuff in the past, or even Cam Taylor-Britt in terms of physical skill set, size, movement, abilities. Could he maybe play some slot? He's never done it, but those two guys make a lot more sense in my mind as slot corner options than DJ Turner. Whereas DJ Turner, I think Eric Stokes, I think Trey Waynes, no, he's running up and down the boundary, preventing big plays, sticking him on the outside. And when Turner did play last season, he actually did a good job preventing receptions, and he made plays on the ball. He showed real promise. So that's why I'm I don't know, man. Kind of like the idea of Cam Taylor-Britt in the slot. If I'm putting this defense together, go with Hill and Turner on the outside with crazy athletic potential. Britt in a contract year. 5'11", 202 is good size. He's been an adequate run defender here. I'm very curious what Bengals fans think of that, because to me, that's how I would play it. But right now, that's not what they're doing. And I find that fascinating. But I do still think there's a lot of potential there in Turner, who was a second-round pick just a few years ago. Obviously, we will see how this all plays out, where we don't even fully know what types of players Daxton Hill and DJ Turner are, and we don't even know who the starting slot corner is going to be at this point in time. Leads to a lot of volatility, both good and bad, for this cornerback room. And then with the safeties, it's not an exciting group, man. Geno Stone is going to have to start again this year because they just don't have options there. This was a tragic signing for them, frankly. He continued to be a liability as a run defender, as he was in Baltimore. But he struggled to come in, pick up a new system, communicate well on the back end, and cover consistently at all. He was hard to watch last year, but they just don't have other options right now. I would love to see this team make some phone calls, keep an eye on who gets cut, challenge Geno Stone a little bit, because I just don't think he's long here for this role. But at least what it's worth, new coaching, Lou Anarumo asked a ton of his safeties. Maybe a different staff, a different scheme can get him back to 2023, 2022 in Baltimore, where he was at least a good coverage player that found himself around the ball quite a lot. So I did put the up and down yellow arrow on Geno Stone, at least to say there's been good years of coverage tape in there in the past. Am I necessarily a believer that he will get back to that? Not fully, but it's at least possible. We've seen it. But then you do have Jordan Battle. I like Jordan Battle, and I do put the up arrow on him. I think he will settle in as a nice, balanced safety. I always felt like he looked like an NFL, a potential NFL starter on tape to me, just because of the balance is really what I keep coming back to on him. He's a willing run defender. He's got enough to run man coverage. He's got decent enough range on the back end to be a free safety. He's got the IQ to play quarters and match and communicate and all that stuff from your two shell structures. There's just a lot to like with him, but nothing he does is screams high end. So he eventually earned this job. They moved on from Von Bell, and I'm happy for him. I think he will be a high floor option for them, if not some crazy difference maker on the back end. But that's really all of it. The depth, there's not really a lot to say there. The safety depth is essentially non-existent. Again, if they don't pick someone up, I would be stunned. But Tyson Anderson's hardly played here. A big-bodied guy out of, Toledo? I remember watching him. He likes to hit. Good special teamer. Dajon Anthony, a 7th-round pick last year that I didn't get to coming out of Ole Miss. But he played 12 snaps last year. And then he got undrafted types behind that. Your corner depth, DJ Ivey, 7th-round pick in 2023, has played very minimal snaps here and there as kind of a dime back, but really not expecting anything there. Marco Wilson, we know what he is at this point. He's a tremendous athlete, elite athletic tools for this position, but no idea what he's doing and cannot tackle. So you know what you have there. And then Jalen Davis, he's been around here for a long time. He's been on NFL rosters for 7 years now, so you would think special teams, they like him, but hasn't emerged as a coverage defender on a defense that has needed some corners, so you wouldn't expect that from him there. Really just comes down to this motley crew of potential starters here. You do have some upside. You legitimately have a world if Daxton Hill and DJ Turner emerge as good starters. And, I'm not so encouraged by Josh Newton, but maybe they do figure it out and put Cam Taylor-Britt in the slot as this new staff is kind of sorting through things. And he honestly could be even better in the slot than he's been on the outside, in my opinion. There's real upside with that trio. It's just very unproven. And then, maybe Geno Stone gets back on track from a coverage perspective and Jordan Battle settles in as a nice starter. That could be a top 15, top 20 secondary, which would be a massive win for this Bengals team. I don't know that they could hit that this year. That's more of a long shot, but definitely a wild card. This could be the disaster that we have them ranked at right now, which is 30th to 31st in the league with a C- grade for defensive back coverage. They also are not particularly good against the run either. We saw so many big plays allowed with missed tackles and poor pursuit, not able to get off blocks on the back end from a similar collection of these guys last year as well. They are tied for the worst grade in the league for defensive back run support as well. So I repeat, this could be a disaster just like last year, or maybe it could be okay to good-ish in a relative best case scenario. But let's start to tie this all together with the defensive summary. You knew this was coming, Bengals fans, but I have the Bengals, as we're ranking these teams damn near at their floor. The Bengals are my 31st ranked defense. To be fair, with some clarity on the Trey Hendrickson situation, they at least surpassed the Panthers for our last ranked defense. But that's about the best thing I can say here, at least for the rankings for now. As we discussed, there's pockets of upside, really at all three levels. You got youth, the D-line, linebacker, and secondary. If Al Golden can be a great coach and you can get some development on this damn side of the ball that they have not had for years now. I mean, the only time they were good on defense was when they just threw a bunch of money at veterans when Joe Burrow was still on his rookie contract, and those veterans meshed well with Lou Anarumo, but they have not been able to replenish those veterans with draft picks and coaching and development. If Al Golden can be better, especially in that phase than Lou was, you can start to get this thing back on track. And can this defense be the 20th best defense this year? I think there's a path. There's a narrow margin of error to thread there, but there's pockets of talent to get there. But for now, 31st in pass defense, 29th in run defense. Work to do is the defining theme of this defense here. And thank God they at least have Trey Hendrickson to build around here, because otherwise this would be easily the 32nd ranked defense in the league. But let's talk a little bit of special teams here. They're running it back. They don't make really any changes here of note. But with my formula for the special teams, the Bengals come out as the 17th overall unit, so a solid group. They managed to rank as PFF's number one special teams last year. Maybe a bit of a surprise, but that helps them out there. 20th with the DVOA analysis on them there. But the kicker grade is really the X factor here, because Evan McPherson was awesome out the gate, and then the dude's missed 11 field goals over the last 2 years. He's made just 79% of those field goal attempts. He has not lived up to the contract they paid him, and they've kind of got stuck with it because they did draft him, and he was good early. We know the talent's in there, but to say he's been streaky is to say the least. So if he can get back on track, you should be in pretty good shape here, because despite that, with special teams coordinator Darren Simmons here, this team has graded out pretty well in terms of covering kicks. And you've got a punter in Ryan Rakow that was solid last year, gets the 17th ranking after his first season for punters. The return men haven't shown too much. Charlie Jones will handle a lot of that stuff, punt returns, kick returns, but they also mixed in Jermaine Burton, Isaiah Williams, Chase Brown. So not too much excitement from those return men, but they are young. Maybe they can prove to be better than they have so far. But yeah, it's a solid special teams, 17th in the league. But next, let's summarize this team's strengths, weaknesses, and highlight those pivotal factors that will ultimately determine the success of this team and if they can achieve some of their playoff hopes. But the strengths really are staring at you in the face. Quarterback, weaponry, and that's it. Those two units doing a lot, if not all, of the heavy lifting here. And then they have some weaknesses that also show up as wild cards, that theme of they just got to get to work. They got to start developing some of these units that they have invested in with big draft picks. Offensive line, Amarius Mims, Devin Fairchild, let's get going there. Defensive line, can any number of these young, recently drafted pieces come in and actually help Trey Hendrickson this year? The secondary, what a mess of potential young talent they have in that cornerback room especially. But Jordan Battle as well, still relatively unproven. And then the other weakness for this team, week one. Kidding, but not kidding. That's also kind of just a reflection of Zach Taylor maybe being a non-strength / potential weakness as an overall head coach. But seriously, can the Bengals just come out and not lose to Cleveland week one this year? That'd be fantastic. And then some of the other wild cards there, like I said, the defensive coaching, I think kind of goes hand in hand with the D-line and the secondary. I think Al Golden and this new look staff coming in, can they do a better job developing some of those young players, as we mentioned? And then Evan McPherson, the kicker, with the special teams. Can he get back on track? That's actually really notable for this team's ability to win close games, which they were in a lot of last year. But let's finish up by taking a look at the Bengals' schedule, how hard it is, and what that could mean for what this team can accomplish this year. So it's a balanced schedule. There's tough runs and there's favorable aspects of it as well. They do have, to me, 5 games that, granted, they're the Bengals and they like to bungle it and play down to their competition, but weeks 1 and 2, you've got at Cleveland. Can they get rid of this freaking week 1 curse that they've had? Maybe I'm overly optimistic, but they will be heavy favorites in that game. Cleveland doesn't even know who their starting quarterback is right now. Jacksonville's a young team, still going to be figuring things out. That's going to be the Bengals' home opener. If any year they should start 2-0, it would be this year. Get off to a good start, be a real football team before the month of October. That would be great, because then you got to go to Minnesota. You got to go to Denver, 2 of the hardest places to play in the league. You got Detroit coming to town. You got to go to Lambeau. Things get real very quickly there, weeks 3 through 6. But then things lighten up again. You got, middle of the season there, you got both your Steelers games. Not saying those are going to be easy, but very much winnable for the Bengals. I think they are a better football team than the Steelers. You got the Jets at home. You got the Bears at home. You got the Patriots at home. I like that stretch for them, and their bye week is in the middle of there. And then week 13, things ramp up big time for you. You got to go to Baltimore. You got to go to Buffalo, and then you host Baltimore. That's going to be a telling 3 weeks for the Bengals. But even if they go 0-3 in that stretch, they can definitely look at the final 3 games and get their act together, as they've had to do in seasons past, at Miami in December. Not necessarily a cold weather game, but we know Miami has had their shortcomings at the end of seasons, along with Arizona. That's been the narrative on them. And then Cleveland at home, week 18. So as far as schedules are concerned, in a year where the NFL has a lot of good teams, I do like this schedule for the Bengals. I think it lines up well for them, but definitely can't come out and lose in Cleveland week 1 as they did literally just a year ago. Embarrassed themselves in a 24-3 opener in Cleveland. So their Vegas odds are still pretty high. Anytime you have a quarterback like Joe Burrow, it's the type of QB that gamblers like to put their money on and find value on. So their over-under is 9.5 wins, more than they had last year. Their Super Bowl odds is top 7, 18-1. They're tied with one other team there for Super Bowl odds, and they're not even that far behind in terms of division odds, plus 225. Vegas is saying you play this division 100 times, the Bengals win it, 40 times? Those are some pretty lofty numbers on a team that is basically all question marks on defense and has a bad offensive line Honestly, man, I'm just going to say it. If you assured me that they will beat Cleveland week 1, I would take the over. If it's going to be just like last year and they start slow, I could see a similar season to what they had last year. I lean towards optimism in that, yes, they will take care of Cleveland and get off to a better start this year. That they don't have so many contract disputes like Jamar Chase, right? Wasn't like really in camp last year. Like, I feel like they really figured themselves out offensively last year and should be much more prepared to hit the ground running on that side of the ball. And yeah, defensively, it's going to be hard for them to be really worse than they were last year. And I think they got reasons to believe they could be better as well. So I still lean taking the over on the Bengals as like a 10 or 11 win team. They're going to lose games in shootouts that are just out of Joe Burrow's control. But gun to my head, I think I would go over the 9.5. And then, yeah, if the Bengals can get in, this team can beat anybody any given week. That's the thing about having a QB like Joe Burrow. But they can kind of beat themselves, and their margin for error on offense is just so slim as well. A fumbled punt, a batted pass that ends up in the QB's hands, a dropped third down can be make or break in some of these games for the Bengals, and it's just a tough world to live in. So that's how they find themselves as our 15th overall team in these power rankings. I would love to see them exceed this ranking. They just got a lot of work to do. I would love to hear from you guys, what you guys think of this ranking. What are your expectations for the Bengals this year? Can they get back into the playoffs and make some noise? Let me know all of it in the comments down below, as well as if you think I missed anything with this Bengals team. I appreciate you guys for watching. Please hit that like button on the way out. Make sure you're subscribed. We got 14 more of these bad boys coming at you here over the course of the next month. And that's all we got. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. Peace out.